Mr. Walker, if you refuse to pay the dues, the association will have no choice but to evict you. Those were the first words I heard from a stranger standing at my front gate, on land I had bought, paid for, and bled for. I remember setting my coffee cup on the hood of my truck and laughing, not the polite kind, the kind that makes people take a step back. "You're trespassing," I said, "and unless that clipboard comes with a badge and a warrant, you're leaving." The man hesitated, adjusted his tie, and looked over his shoulder toward a white SUV idling at the end of the road. Through the tinted glass I saw her, perfectly still, sunglasses gleaming. Ellen Vance, president of the Coyote Ridge HOA. She didn't speak, just lifted her phone, snapped a picture of me, and drove off. That's when I realized this wasn't about dues. It was a declaration of war. "I bought this farm to get away from people like you," I muttered, staring after the SUV. "But if you want to fight, fine. You just found one." 3 months earlier, I'd stood inside a dusty county courthouse while the auctioneer wiped his brow and called for one last bid on Parcel 17B. 160 acres, rural reclamation eligible. The screen behind him showed a washed-out satellite image, a patch of tan and green that looked like nothing and nowhere. Nobody raised a hand. I did. "Sold," the gavel cracked, and just like that, I owned an old farm no one else wanted. I wasn't running from anything, not exactly. After 20 years testifying as a forensic survey expert, too many courtrooms, too many arguments about inches of dirt and lines on a page, I wanted silence. I wanted a horizon that wasn't made of glass and steel. The first week out there felt like medicine. I parked my Airstream beside the leaning barn, patched its roof with sheet aluminum, wired a small solar array, and lived on black coffee and fried eggs. The days smelled of sage and hot dust. At night, the coyotes yipped somewhere down by the creek, and for the first time in decades, I slept without streetlight bleeding through the blinds. Neighbors from Coyote Ridge occasionally drove past on the county road. Same beige SUVs, same manicured hair. They'd slow, stare, and keep going. I figured they thought I was some drifter or prepper. I didn't care. The deed in my glove box said otherwise. Outside all subdivision and association boundaries. The words felt like scripture. I worked the land the old-fashioned way, clearing brush, grading the access road, replacing fence posts one by one. On Sundays, I'd sit by the pond, more mud than water, and imagine it full again, a place for ducks to land. That dream kept me going through blisters and sunburn. The only person who ever stopped was Sheriff Tom Henderson. Big man, slow drawl, handshake like a truck bumper. "Heard you bought the Miller place," he said. "Been an eyesore for years. Good to see someone fixing it up." "Trying to," I told him. "It's outside Coyote Ridge, right?" He gave me a look that lingered half a beat too long. "On paper, yeah, but folks in that HOA, they like to think the county stops at their street signs. Don't let them push you around." I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. A week later, I was trimming mesquite along the east fence when the white SUV appeared, gleaming like a pearl dropped in mud. The woman who stepped out was all sharp lines, pressed suit, pearl necklace, clipboard tucked against her chest. "Excuse me," she called, making the words sound like an order. "Are you the owner here?" "That's right," I said. "Jake Walker. Can I help you?" "I'm Ellen Vance, president of the Coyote Ridge Homeowners Association." She offered a tight smile. "We've noticed increased activity on this property, heavy equipment, unapproved structures, noise complaints." I wiped sweat from my neck. "Ma'am, this land isn't part of your community." "Oh, I'm sure that's what your realtor told you," she said sweetly. "But the borders were redrawn last quarter. You'll be receiving information soon." Then she turned on her heel and left me in a cloud of caliche dust. That night, sitting by my campfire, I reread the deed for the 10th time. Every line said the same thing: county property, not HOA. Still, the way she'd said "you'll be receiving information soon" gnawed at me. I'd heard that tone before in courtrooms, bureaucrats who smile while they load the gun. I poured a little whiskey into my coffee mug and stared at the barn roof, glinting in the moonlight. The metal looked like armor. Back then I didn't know I'd need it. But now, remembering that morning at the gate, the clipboard, the threat, the camera flash, I know exactly when the war began. And if Ellen Vance thought she could evict me from my own dirt, she'd just mistaken quiet for weakness. The next few mornings were quiet, almost too quiet. the kind of calm that hums before a storm. I spent my days repairing the north fence, driving posts into the red clay, and pretending that encounter with Ellen Vance was nothing but a bad dream in a crisp pantsuit. By the fourth day, I'd almost convinced myself she'd moved on. Then came the knock. It wasn't the gentle, neighborly kind. It was a hard, official-sounding thud, thud, thud that echoed off the metal siding of the barn. I stepped out, rag still in my hand, and found two men standing near the gate. Both wore reflective vests stamped Coyote Ridge Community Affairs. The first one was young, clean shave, clipboard tucked like a weapon. The second looked older, soft in the middle, but carried himself like he'd been bossing people around since dial-up internet. "Morning," the young one said with a salesman's grin. "Mr. Walker, we're here to deliver your association welcome packet." I stared at them for a long moment. What association would that be? "The Coyote Ridge Homeowners Association," he said, as if reading from a teleprompter. "Under the revised Boundary Expansion Charter, your property now falls within our jurisdiction. Congratulations, you're officially part of the community." "Congratulations?" I asked. "That's one way to describe extortion." The older man cleared his throat. "We're just here to drop off your documents, sir. First dues payment is $6,300, payable by the end of the month. You'll find details inside." He handed me a thick envelope sealed with a shiny HOA logo. I didn't take it. "You boys see that fence?" I pointed at the barbed wire running the perimeter. "That fence marks county land, my land. You step 1 foot over it, that's trespassing." The younger one forced a polite smile. "Sir, refusal to cooperate may result in fines or legal—" "Save it," I interrupted. "You can take your paperwork and shove it right back into the SUV you came from." They exchanged looks, the kind bureaucrats give each other when someone doesn't play by the script. The older man tried again. "We'd really prefer not to escalate." I stepped closer, close enough for them to see the calluses on my hands and the steel in my eyes. "You don't scare me. Now leave before I call the sheriff." They finally turned, muttering to each other, and climbed back into their vehicle. Gravel crunched under the tires as they drove away. I stood there a long while, watching the dust settle. The air smelled of cedar and diesel. Somewhere a hawk cried overhead. For a man who'd spent 2 decades reading property lines, I'd never felt one this clear, a line between right and wrong, freedom and control. That evening I called Sheriff Henderson. He answered on the second ring. "Tom, it's Jake. Got a couple of your friends from the HOA here today. Claim they own my land." He sighed. "Yeah, I heard they've been expanding their reach lately. Probably a mix-up with the county map." "Then tell them to unmix it," I said. "I'll make a few calls," he promised. "But don't poke the bear, Jake. Those folks have lawyers on speed dial." "Good," I said. "So do I." After hanging up, I poured myself a beer and walked the fence line. The sun was bleeding out behind the hills, painting everything in gold and rust. For a while, it was easy to believe the worst was over. But just as I reached the north corner, I saw something glinting near the post, a small piece of plastic half buried in dirt. I bent down and picked it up. A camera lens, cracked but still wired, disguised inside what looked like a fake rock. A surveillance bug. My stomach went cold. I scanned the fence and spotted another one farther down, barely visible among the weeds. HOA-grade spying equipment. Small, expensive, and deliberate. That night I sat at my workbench under the yellow glow of a lantern, dismantling the devices one by one. Whoever planted them knew what they were doing, and they'd done it at least a day before the clipboard twins showed up. They weren't just claiming ownership, they were gathering intelligence. When the last screw clinked onto the table, I leaned back in my chair and stared at the pieces. The wires, the lens, the tiny circuit board. "This isn't a boundary dispute," I said aloud to no one. "It's a damn invasion." Outside, the wind pushed against the barn door, making it creak and rattle like an old warning. By the time I turned in that night, the decision was already made. I'd spent my life drawing maps for other people. Now it was time to defend the only one that mattered, the map with my name on it. And if Ellen Vance thought her HOA rules applied out here in the dirt and sage, she was about to learn what real boundaries felt like. 2 mornings later, I woke to the sound of rain hammering against the roof of the Airstream, the kind that makes the whole world smell like wet metal and mud. I brewed a cup of black coffee on the propane stove, cracked the door open, and stepped outside barefoot into the drizzle. That's when I saw it. A A sheet of paper was plastered to my gate, curling at the corners, soaked halfway through but still legible. Someone had taped it there during the night. Blue painter's tape, cheap and hurried. I peeled it off carefully, water dripping down my wrist. Notice of violations. Unauthorized grading, unapproved fencing, excessive noise, and non-compliant land use. Below that, another line, failure to submit landscaping plans for review, no letterhead, no signature, just bureaucratic nonsense in Times New Roman. I actually laughed, out loud. Landscaping plans, I muttered. For a damn farm. I tossed the paper into a puddle, watched the ink bleed into the water, and told myself that would be the end of it. But deep down, I knew better. These people didn't stop when ignored. They saw silence as permission. By mid-morning, the rain eased off. I loaded gravel into the old Ford, humming along with the country station on the radio, when I caught movement in the side mirror. 2 vehicles pulling up to the gate, a white SUV and a silver hybrid, Coyote Ridge plates. My stomach tightened. I killed the engine and stepped out. 2 figures got out, both wearing neon vests that read Community Affairs Division. The man in front carried a thick folder. His partner, a woman with a permanent smile, held a tablet as if she were about to conduct a census. "Good morning," she chirped. "We're with the Coyote Ridge HOA Oversight Committee." I crossed my arms. "You're on the wrong side of the fence, sweetheart." The man opened his folder with practiced grace. As of January 1st, under the revised Charter of Coyote Ridge, Section 7, Clause 3A, your property now falls within our maintenance district. Maintenance district? I repeated. You mean your little HOA kingdom? He ignored the tone. That means an initial membership fee of $6,300 and acknowledgement of compliance by the end of the month. I stared at him until the smile on his face began to wilt. You might want to tell your legal department to double-check the county maps before you start trespassing. This isn't trespassing, Mr. Walker, the woman said softly, still smiling. It's an official notice. I pointed at the ground beneath her polished flats. Thick mud, my mud. That's county soil, ma'am. You're standing on private property. Take your notice and walk it back to whatever cul-de-sac dreamland you came from. Her smile flickered. The man shut his folder. Refusal to comply may result in penalties. Go ahead, I said. I've got a friend at the sheriff's office who loves paperwork. They hesitated, clearly not used to resistance, then turned back to their cars. The SUV spun gravel as it pulled away. When the sound faded, I leaned against my truck, exhaled, and looked out over my land. The pond shimmered in the weak sunlight. The barn stood stubborn as ever, and for a fleeting second I felt proud enough to forget how deep this fight could go. That afternoon, I drove into town to make sure I hadn't lost my mind. The clerk at the county assessor's office confirmed exactly what I already knew. My parcel was fully outside any HOA boundary. Not even close, she said, laughing when I read her the clause. They can't extend jurisdiction without consent. That's not how zoning works. I thanked her, made copies of every document I had, the deed, the plat map, GPS coordinates, and sealed them in a folder labeled, "In case of HOA nonsense." By the time I got home, the clouds had lifted. The air smelled of wet cedar and diesel from the generator. I sat by the pond with a cold beer, watching the reflection of my solar lights ripple on the surface. Somewhere in the distance, faint but distinct, came the hum of a drone. It hovered a moment, then drifted back toward the ridge of beige rooftops beyond the hill. "So, that's how you want to play?" I whispered. "Fine." The wind rustled through the sage, carrying the smell of rain and trouble. And just like that, peace on the Walker farm was officially over. The next morning the air felt different, sharper, restless. Like the sky itself was waiting for something to snap. I didn't sleep much. Every time the wind shifted, I imagined that faint mechanical hum circling overhead again. By sunrise I was already outside, coffee in hand, scanning the horizon. Nothing but the distant roofs of Coyote Ridge glinting in the early light. For a moment, I almost convinced myself the drone had been a trick of the wind. Then I saw it. A small silver speck hovering above the eastern fence line, steady and deliberate. When the sun caught it just right, the camera lens blinked like a tiny red eye. I set my cup down, walked to the truck, and pulled my binoculars from the glove box. The drone was moving slow, tracing the property boundary, my boundary, like it was drawing a line of its own. I muttered, "You've got some nerve, Ellen." After 10 minutes, it turned and sailed back toward the manicured edge of Coyote Ridge. I followed it with my eyes until it vanished behind the row of houses. I'd had enough. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my contacts, and called Sheriff Henderson. He answered on the second ring. "Morning, Jake. You got a minute?" "For you, sure. What's going on?" "I've got an HOA drone running aerial recon over my land." He sighed, the kind of long, weary exhale that sounds like someone setting down a heavy box. "A drone? Probably just some real estate surveyor." "Sheriff, it was less than 50 feet over my fence, red light blinking. You want to tell me what they're surveying?" Silence. Then, "I'll make some calls, but Jake, do me a favor and don't do anything stupid." "Define stupid," I said. "You know what I mean." "Yeah," I said, hanging up. "I do." That afternoon, I checked my trail cameras, 4 in total, hidden in the trees and along the fence posts. I'd installed them out of habit, not paranoia. 20 years of boundary disputes teaches you to keep receipts. When I pulled the memory cards and loaded them into my laptop, the evidence was crystal clear. The drone had been flying patterns over my property for at least 3 days. One clip even caught its reflection in the pond, hovering like a vulture. The next clip froze my breath. 2 figures standing on the far side of my east fence, wearing reflective vests with the HOA crest. One of them pointed across the property. The other held a measuring stick and a clipboard. They weren't guessing, they were mapping. I printed the stills, marked the timestamp, and added them to my growing folder. Then I did something Sheriff Henderson probably wouldn't have liked. I took my .30-30 Winchester from the rack, cleaned it, and left it by the door. Call it a statement of intent. By late afternoon, clouds were piling high and dark over the ridge. I decided to meet the problem head-on. I drove down to the county records office again, requested the original zoning overlays, and compared them line by line against the so-called revised charter the HOA reps had mentioned. They'd fabricated the extension, plain as day. No signatures, no recorded minutes, no legal notice. Just a PDF printed with confidence and lies. Back home, I found another envelope in the mailbox. No return address this time, just my name scrawled across the front. Inside was a single sheet. Final notice of delinquency. Non-payment of dues will result in lien and eviction action. No signature, no seal. But stapled to the bottom was a blurry aerial photo of my farm, complete with highlighted areas labeled Maintenance Responsibility Zones. I could almost hear Ellen's smug voice reading it out loud. I sat on the tailgate, holding that paper in one hand and my coffee in the other, while the sky went from blue to bruised. Lightning flickered far off toward the mountains. They weren't just testing me anymore. They were declaring ownership, piece by piece, letter by letter. By nightfall, the wind had picked up again, rattling the loose tin on the barn roof. I climbed up to secure it, and there, above the ridge, that red blinking light returned. It hovered, unbothered, like it knew I was watching. I reached down, grabbed the Winchester, and raised it just enough for the scope to find that glint of metal. I didn't fire, not yet. I just wanted whoever was piloting that thing to see one simple message: I see you too. The drone veered left, shot upward, and disappeared into the clouds. I climbed down, heart pounding, half angry, half exhilarated. The war had gone aerial now, and tomorrow, I decided, it was time to bring it back to Earth. I didn't see the first truck until it was already halfway down my drive. It was close to midnight, a dry, moonless night, the kind where every sound travels for miles. I'd been half asleep on the couch inside the Airstream when the motion alert from my South Trail cam buzzed my phone. The image came through grainy but clear enough. 2 vehicles creeping through the gate I'd locked at dusk. Headlights off. My stomach dropped. I slipped on my boots, grabbed the Winchester, and stepped outside. The night was still except for the distant rumble of engines idling low. My solar lights cast a weak glow along the fence line, enough to catch movement in the distance. 2 figures, maybe 3. One carried a crowbar. Another held a flashlight with a red lens, sweeping it over the ground. I stayed in the shadows by the barn, keeping low. The air smelled of dust and gasoline. My pulse thudded in my ears. The nearest man spoke, low, impatient. "Cut the damn line already. She said take down the gate." She. There was only one she that made sense. Ellen Vance. Metal clanged. Sparks flared as wire cutters snapped through the chain that held the gate. The beam from the flashlight shook as the men wrestled the gate loose and tossed it aside. Then came another voice, nervous, younger. "You sure this is legal?" "Don't ask questions, Tyler. Just do what you're told." Tyler, Ellen's son. I recognized the name from the HOA roster I'd pulled offline, the same kid who drove the silver hybrid. I hit record on my phone camera, zooming in. The night vision caught his face clear as day, jittery, sweating, looking over his shoulder like he knew he didn't belong there. They walked toward my generator next, tracing the extension cord that ran from the barn. Tyler crouched down and yanked at it. I heard the snap, then the sputter as the generator coughed and died. The lights along the fence flickered out one by one. That was enough. I stepped out of the shadows, voice steady but sharp. "You boys lost?" Both froze. The older man swung his flashlight toward me. "This is private," I cut him off. "You're damn right it is. Mine." The beam hit my face, then the barrel of the Winchester angled low across my chest. I didn't raise it. Didn't have to. The message was loud enough. "Back away from the equipment," I said. "Sir, this is Coyote Ridge." Wrong answer. I thumbed the safety, just enough for the click to echo. "Now, pick up that gate and put it back where you found it." Tyler whispered something. The older man hissed, "Let's go," and grabbed his arm. They backed up, slow and careful, until they reached the SUV. "Tell Ellen if she wants a war, she should come herself," I called after them. They didn't answer. The engines roared to life, spinning mud as they peeled away down the road. I stood there a long time, the silence pressing in after the noise. Then I knelt beside the generator, reconnected the cord, and flipped the switch. The machine sputtered, coughed, and came back to life. Light spilled across the yard again. When I finally sat down inside, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from adrenaline. I'd been in courtrooms where property lines decided fortunes, but this was different. This was raw, primitive, lines drawn in dirt, enforced in the dark. At 1:12 a.m., I drove into town and straight to the sheriff's office. Henderson was still there, paperwork spread across his desk. He looked up, bleary-eyed. "Jake, it's late." "Yeah," I said, sliding my phone across the desk. "So were they." He watched the video in silence. When Tyler's face came into frame, his jaw tightened. That's bad. That's felony trespass, vandalism, maybe tampering with utilities. You going to arrest them? Or should I?" He rubbed his temples. "We'll investigate. I'll log it and call their attorney in the morning. If this was reversed, if I'd cut their power and tore their gate down, you'd have me in cuffs by now." He didn't argue, just gave me a long, tired look. "I'll push it up the chain. You should probably talk to a lawyer." "Oh, I plan to." I left the office feeling like the floor had shifted beneath me, the kind of shift that comes before a landslide. Back at the farm, I poured a drink and sat by the window. Out across the dark fields, the windmill creaked softly in the night breeze. The fence was bent but still standing. I told myself that was enough for now, but deep down, I knew this was just the first shot. And people like Ellen Vance didn't quit when they lost a skirmish. They regrouped. So would I. By the next morning, I'd already made 3 phone calls before sunrise. One to the county clerk, one to my insurance provider, and one to a woman I hadn't spoken to in almost 5 years. Her name was Claire Benton. Back when I was still testifying in court, Claire had been the only attorney who didn't talk over the evidence. Young, sharp, and allergic to bullshit. If anyone knew how to bury a bureaucratic bully, it was her. She picked up on the second ring. "Jake Walker, haven't heard that name in a while." "Yeah," I said. "I've got a situation. HOA boundary fraud, trespassing, vandalism, possible extortion. Sounds like a Friday." I told her everything. The forged paperwork, the night raid, the drone, the fake dues notices. She didn't interrupt once, just took notes. When I finished, she said, "I'll draft a cease and desist letter by noon. Certified mail. You'll hand-deliver a copy to the sheriff and keep one for yourself. And Jake, don't talk to them again without me." Wouldn't dream of it. By that afternoon, I had a thick envelope on the passenger seat of my truck, stamped in bold red. Legal notice. Property encroachment. The kind of mail that made even confident people sweat. I dropped one at Sheriff Henderson's office. He gave me a half-hearted good luck, and drove the second straight to Coyote Ridge's community office. It was a glass-fronted building that looked more like a dentist's lobby than a neighborhood hub. When I walked in, the receptionist blinked at the mud on my boots. "I'm here for Ellen Vance," I said. "She's in a meeting." "She's about to have another one." Ellen came out 5 minutes later, heels clicking like gunshots on tile. "Mr. Walker, I don't appreciate intimidation tactics." "Then you're gonna hate this," I said, sliding the envelope across the counter. "Cease and desist. You, or anyone acting on behalf of the Coyote Ridge HOA, set foot on my property again, and you'll be explaining it to a judge." Her smile never faltered. "You're overreacting. We're simply enforcing community standards." "Outside your community," I said. "We'll let the courts decide." Looking forward to it, when I walked out, I could feel her eyes on the back of my neck. For 2 days, there was silence. No drones, no visitors, no mysterious letters. I started to think maybe Claire's letter had done the trick. Then, on the third morning, I heard engines. I looked out the window and counted 4 trucks idling by the main road. The sides were painted with neat blue lettering, Coyote Ridge Landscaping and Maintenance. Men in reflective vests climbed out, stretching, laughing, unloading shovels, PVC pipe, and a backhoe. I grabbed my phone and walked down the drive. "Morning, fellas," I said. "Who hired you?" A kid barely 20 looked up from a roll of blueprints. The HOA sent us. Said we're installing drainage lines and signage for the new community park." "Park," I repeated. "You mean on my land?" He glanced at his foreman. Yes, sir. Right through that field." I smiled. "You boys might want to check your GPS." The foreman, a big man with a sunburned neck and zero patience, walked over. "We've got the permit right here, signed by the HOA." I took the paper from his hand, scanned it once, and whistled. "That's cute, but this here is my permit." I reached into my jacket and pulled out the official plat map and deed from the county. Legally surveyed, registered, and filed. You break ground here, I call the sheriff and sue you into the next tax season. The foreman's jaw tightened. "We're just following orders." "Good," I said, turning back toward the house. "Follow this one, leave." They hesitated, then loaded their tools back into the trucks. As they pulled away, I snapped a photo of their license plates and emailed them to Claire. She called as 10 minutes later. "They tried to start construction?" "Yeah," I said. "Told them to go build their playground somewhere else." "Good," she said. "Document everything. Photos, timestamps, GPS data. They're digging their own grave, metaphorically, for now." When I hung up, I realized I was smiling. The fear that had crept in over the past week was gone. In its place was something sharper. Focus. They'd played their move. Now it was my turn. I walked the edge of the property that evening, marking spots on the map, thinking through every trick I'd ever used in a courtroom. If they wanted to play jurisdictional games, I'd beat them with their own rulebook. The war was no longer about fences or signs. It was about proof. And I'd make sure every inch of this land spoke in my favor. 2 days after the landscaping crew retreated, Claire called with a tone that told me she'd found something ugly. "Jake, I've been digging through the county's GIS system," she said. "There's a new zoning overlay for your area, dated 3 months ago. It shows the Coyote Ridge boundary extended half a mile east, right over your property line." My stomach tightened. "That's impossible. There wasn't any public notice." "There wasn't supposed to be," she said. "The file was slipped in under an administrative correction, signed off by a clerk named Susan Harper." The name rang familiar. I flipped through the folder on my desk, then froze when I found it. One of the HOA newsletters I'd printed from their website. "Community thanks Susan Harper, cousin to HOA President Ellen Vance, for her continued help coordinating records." "Bingo," Claire muttered when I told her. "Conflict of interest, forgery of a public record, maybe both." She emailed me the document. When I opened it, she burned hot in my chest. The boundary line on the map had been digitally redrawn, just a smooth little curve that folded my entire east field into Coyote Ridge territory. The metadata showed the file was uploaded after hours from a private device. I knew this game. I'd testified in cases where corporations did the same thing, quiet edits, invisible theft, but this time the theft had my name on it. I called the county clerk's office myself. The woman who answered sounded nervous when I asked about the file. "That's odd," she said. "I can't find any supporting documentation for that boundary change. It should have had signatures from at least 3 departments." "It didn't," I said. "Send me a copy of the original entry log. I'll forward it to my attorney." "Mr. Walker, she said softly. You didn't hear this from me, but I've been told to stop asking questions about Coyote Ridge. That told me everything I needed to know. By the time I hung up, my pulse was pounding. I stared at the map, tracing the new line with my finger. They'd literally drawn my freedom away with a mouse click. That night, I sat by the kitchen table under the dull light of a single bulb, spread both maps side by side, the real one and the forgery, and started marking points with my pen. Coordinates, survey posts, GPS markers. If they wanted to play cartographer, I'd show them what a real one could do. Every boundary pin on my land was still where it had been 30 years ago, marked with rebar and capped in bright orange paint. I had the original measurements, the chain of title, the state survey data. It was airtight. But anger alone wouldn't fix it. I needed proof, irrefutable, official proof. So I made a call to an old contact at the State Geodetic Survey Office, a woman named Ingrid Dalton. We'd worked together once on a lawsuit over mineral rights. She was blunt, precise, and allergic to corruption. When I explained what was happening, she didn't even hesitate. Send me your coordinates, she said. I'll schedule a site review. I don't like the smell of this. She arrived 2 mornings later in a state-issued pickup, steel-toed boots, ponytail, and a laser rangefinder slung over her shoulder like a rifle. For 4 hours, Ingrid walked every inch of the eastern boundary, taking GPS readings and setting fresh stakes. Her scanner beeped, her tablet hummed, and I could almost feel the truth taking shape under her boots. When she finally looked up, sweat on her brow, she said, "Your original line is correct. Their map's a forgery." I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "They'll have to fill out a formal correction and file a notice of fraud with the registrar," she added. "And if that upload came from a private device, it's tampering with a public record." I grinned. "You think they'll like those words on a warrant?" She smirked. "Not one bit." That evening, I called Claire. She didn't waste time celebrating. "This isn't just about your property anymore," she said. "If Ellen forged one boundary, there are probably others. We're filing a complaint first thing tomorrow. Fraud, encroachment, falsification of county documents. Let's see how they handle real paperwork." Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the fields in a copper haze. I stood by the fence line with the new survey stakes gleaming bright against the dirt. The real border, the one no HOA could rewrite. For the first time since the white SUV showed up, I felt something close to peace. Not the kind you find in silence, but the kind that comes when you finally know which side of the line you stand on. And now, I was ready to defend it. After Ingrid's visit, the evidence was solid. The map was fake, the boundary shift illegal, and the signatures forged. But experience had taught me something about crooks in nice clothes. They don't fold under proof. They fold under exposure. So I decided to set a trap. That night I sat in the barn, plans spread out across the workbench under a dim lamp, rain tapping softly on the tin roof. I pulled up the old hydrological surveys on my laptop, data from when the county had cataloged groundwater wells. And there it was, a long-capped, inactive well on the far south edge of my land. Well Site 22B, a relic, forgotten, but still listed in state records. If the HOA was trying to annex property, they'd go for that corner next, and I'd make sure it bit back. The next morning, I got to work. I fenced off the small clearing where the well cap sat buried under weeds, dug out the top, cleaned the rust, and planted a sign I made on my shop printer. Protected Aquifer Monitoring Zone. Unauthorized excavation prohibited under Colorado Water Code. Title 37. Violations subject to federal fines. It looked official enough to scare a senator. Then I mounted 2 new trail cameras, one in the oak tree 20 feet away, another hidden inside a hollow fence post, both uploaded to a private cloud account automatically. Finally, to give them a little nudge, I composed an anonymous letter from a concerned resident, typed, "No fingerprints," mailed from the next county over. The property at Parcel 17B is obstructing planned HOA drainage development, refuses shared use of environmental resources, potential liability for the association. Investigate immediately. A concerned resident. I sealed it, smiled, and drove it to the next town's post office. Then I waited. 3 nights passed with nothing but wind and coyotes. On the 4th night, the storm rolled in, thunder low, rain like static. I stayed up late listening to it, half hoping, half doubting they'd take the bait. At dawn, I walked to the southern field. My boots sank into wet clay. Then I saw it. A fresh trench, 6 feet wide, 2, maybe 3 feet deep, cutting straight through the area I'd marked as the protected aquifer zone. Orange flags fluttered in the wind. Stakes, spray paint, someone had worked all night. They'd done exactly what I wanted, and gone too far doing it. The mud still held tire tracks from a heavy truck, probably one of the HOA contractors. I crouched and snapped photos, close-ups of the trench, the flags, the machinery marks, the edge of the well cap they'd disturbed. Then I pulled the footage from the trail cams on my phone. Crystal clear, a silver pickup truck pulling up just after midnight. 2 figures in vests with the HOA logo unloading equipment. One shined a flashlight while the other spray-painted the ground. Caught. I drove straight to town, my tires throwing mud the whole way. Ingrid met me at the site 2 hours later. She took one look at the trench and whistled. They dug 17 feet inside your property. I'll file a report with the state and attach GPS data. That's a violation of both county zoning and federal groundwater code. Claire arrived an hour after that, heels sinking into the mud. You beautiful bastard, she said, grinning. You set them up, didn't you? I shrugged. They just found what they were looking for. She crouched, brushing her hand over the spray paint. This proves intent. You gave them a false boundary. They acted on it. We can charge them with fraudulent misrepresentation and trespass with willful damage. Sounds expensive, I said. For them, yeah. That afternoon, she filed the complaint. Alongside Ingrid's survey and my camera footage, she attached the forged HOA PDF and the metadata from the map file, all pointing back to Ellen Vance and her cousin Susan Harper. The email she sent me after submitting it was short. They're done, Jake. They just don't know it yet. I poured a bourbon that night, sitting on the porch while thunder faded over the hills. The trench gleamed dark in the distance, a wound in the earth, but a wound that would heal. They thought they'd built proof of their authority. Instead, they'd built mine. I leaned back, let the wood creak beneath me, and smiled. You want to play power games on paper? Fine. I just turned your paperwork into evidence. The cicadas hummed, the air smelled of rain and wet sage, and for the first time since buying this land, I felt the tide turning. They'd drawn the line. Now I was the one holding the map. The complaint Claire filed hit the county like a thunderclap. Within 48 hours, half the officials who had been ignoring my calls were suddenly answering on the first ring. Nobody wanted to be the next signature on a forged map. Still, I knew Ellen Vance wouldn't sit still. People like her never retreat. They just look for new angles. 3 days later, the new angle came walking up my driveway. He was tall, lean, mid-40s, wearing a canvas jacket and carrying a small voice recorder. Mr. Walker, Hank Cooper, County Chronicle, mind if I ask you a few questions? I almost told him to turn around, but there was something honest in his voice. Tired, maybe, like a man who had chased too many half-truths and finally smelled a real story. We talked on the porch while bees hummed around the clover. I told him about the drones, the forged maps, the trench. I showed him Ingrid's report and the photos. When I finished, he just shook his head. You realize this could blow the lid off that HOA. We've had letters for years about them. Extra fees, phony citations, threatening notices, but nobody ever had proof. Now you do, I said. That night he published a short column online. Local HOA accused of expanding jurisdiction through forged county records. It wasn't a full expose yet, but it was enough to light the fuse. By morning, my inbox was flooded. A woman named Martha Lane left the first message, former treasurer of the Coyote Ridge HOA. Her voice trembled, equal parts fear and relief. Mr. Walker, I think I can help you. I kept copies of everything. When I called her back, she spoke in a whisper. They forced me out last year after I started asking where the money was going. Ellen's been collecting dues from properties outside the association, calling them adjacent maintenance fees. It's illegal. Do you have proof? I asked. She laughed bitterly. I was the one who printed the receipts. An hour later, she met me at a diner off Highway 7. She slid a worn leather binder across the table. Inside were spreadsheets, budget notes, even handwritten minutes from private board meetings. At the top of one page, special fund, boundary integration. How many properties I'd asked to see? I asked. 4 that I know of, maybe more. I handed the binder to Claire the next morning. She flipped through the pages like a surgeon examining x-rays. "This is gold," she murmured. "Proof of intent, misappropriation of funds, conspiracy to defraud. Ellen's done." But Martha wasn't finished. "There's something else," she said. "They've been hiding payments to a contractor named Pike Infrastructure. I think that's who dug your trench. Same company got kickbacks from HOA funds. Ellen signed off personally." Claire's eyes hardened. "We'll subpoena everything." Within 2 days, she'd filed an amendment to our complaint, adding financial fraud and racketeering. Meanwhile, Hank Cooper ran another article, longer this time, with photos of the forged maps, the trench, and quotes from the state surveyor. The headline read, "Lines in the Dirt, How One Man Exposed a County-Wide HOA Power Grab." It spread fast. By noon, the local radio station was talking about the Walker Farm scandal. I should have felt vindicated, but I didn't. I felt the air tighten, like the storm before a twister. Power like Ellen's doesn't die quietly. It lashes out. That night, the phone rang again. Hank. His voice was urgent. "Jake, watch yourself. A source inside the HOA says Ellen's calling an emergency board session tomorrow morning. They're planning to file a countersuit for defamation and illegal surveillance." I laughed. "They're suing me for catching them committing crimes?" "Yeah," he said. "Classic distraction play. But my contact, she's scared. She says there's more, something about off-book accounts." "Tell her to call Claire," I said. After I hung up, I walked out to the porch. The night was still, the field silver under moonlight. I could almost hear the faint hum of that drone again, though I knew it was gone. Somewhere out there, Ellen was regrouping, but now I wasn't standing alone in the dark anymore. I had allies. Claire with her ironclad filings, Hank with his headlines, and Martha Lane, the quiet accountant who'd finally decided she was done being afraid. The line between my land and theirs had started as a strip of barbed wire. Now it was turning into a wall of truth. The courthouse smelled like old paper and lemon polish, that peculiar scent of bureaucracy and justice colliding. I hadn't been inside one in years, not since the last time I testified as an expert witness. Funny how life circles back when you least expect it. Claire met me by the heavy oak doors, her dark suit pressed sharp enough to slice through lies. "Stay calm," she said. "Let them talk themselves into a corner. You just look credible." "I've had practice," I said. The hearing wasn't supposed to be dramatic, just a procedural motion on our injunction to freeze HOA operations during the investigation. But I'd learned long ago that nothing involving Ellen Vance was ever quiet. She swept into the courtroom 10 minutes late, beige pantsuit immaculate, pearls gleaming like armor. 2 board members followed, plus a lawyer who looked like he'd learned law from a motivational podcast. Ellen didn't look at me, but she didn't have to. The tension hit like static. Judge Margaret Cordova called the room to order, a woman with steel gray hair and the kind of gaze that made people forget to breathe. Claire opened with precision, maps, photos, timestamps, survey data, Ingrid's geodetic report, the forged documents from the county clerk's office, the night footage of Tyler cutting my generator line. Every exhibit unfolded like a blade. "Your Honor," Claire said evenly, "we are not discussing an innocent boundary mix-up. We're discussing a deliberate campaign of fraud, trespass, and coercion, carried out by the Coyote Ridge Homeowners Association under the direction of its president, Mrs. Ellen Vance." Ellen's lawyer rose, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, these accusations are exaggerated. The plaintiff has misconstrued administrative adjustments as malicious intent. Any overlap of jurisdiction was inadvertent." Cordova raised an eyebrow. "Inadvertent? Yet your client authorized expenditures to trench and install signage on private land?" He stammered. "There was ambiguity." "Was there ambiguity," the judge interrupted, "or forgery?" Silence. Claire didn't even glance at him. She simply turned to the clerk and handed over Exhibit 14, the metadata log from the forged zoning file. The screen in front of the court lit up with the upload trail. User, Sharper82, device ID, CVCGHOA1, time, 10:47 p.m. Judge Cordova leaned forward. "Mrs. Vance, is this your cousin, Susan Harper?" Ellen's jaw tightened. "She volunteers in a clerical capacity, so she had access to county records?" Ellen hesitated just long enough for the answer to hang itself. "Yes, Your Honor," Claire said smoothly. And that same access was used to alter boundary maps that reclassified 4 private parcels as HOA controlled, all of which were then billed for maintenance fees. Ellen's lawyer tried to object, but Cordova waved him down. Objection overruled, continue. Claire did, ruthlessly. She presented Martha Lane's binder, the Boundary Integration Fund, the checks written to Pike Infrastructure, the off-book accounts. Each revelation landed like a hammer strike. Finally, Claire looked up. Your Honor, this pattern of falsified records, secret funds, and intimidation is not administrative confusion. It's racketeering, dressed up in khaki slacks and meeting minutes. A murmur spread through the courtroom. One of Ellen's board members sank lower in his chair. Cordova turned to Ellen. Do you wish to respond? Ellen rose, her voice trembling but proud. Your Honor, I have served this community for 15 years. Everything I did was to maintain order. Mr. Walker refuses to cooperate, and now he's weaponizing the courts against an honest organization. Cordova's tone cut through the air like frost. Mrs. Vance, honesty does not require falsifying county records. Claire stood again, holding a single-page document. Your Honor, before we proceed, I'd like to submit a settlement offer on behalf of my client. Cordova nodded. Proceed. Claire read it aloud, voice steady. The plaintiff is willing to settle for the following: a public admission of jurisdictional overreach, full refund to all non-member property owners unlawfully billed, immediate resignation of Mrs. Vance and the current HOA board, public apology in 2 local publications, permanent dissolution of the Coyote Ridge HOA. A gasp rippled through the room. Ellen's lawyer's pen clattered to the table. Ellen's face flushed crimson. This is outrageous. We are the foundation of this community. Cordova's gavel hit once, sharp. Mrs. Vance, you will sit down or you will be removed. She sat, shaking. The judge glanced at Claire. The court will review the evidence. In the meantime, I'm granting your injunction, effective immediately. All HOA activity and spending is to cease pending further investigation. Ellen's lawyer sputtered, Your Honor. Cordova cut him off. Enough. You don't get to call fraud a clerical error. When she adjourned, Ellen finally looked at me, eyes glassy, smile gone. For the first time, she looked small. Outside the courthouse, the air smelled like rain again. Claire handed me a copy of the order, folded crisp. We're not done, she said. Now we start discovery. Emails, bank records, everything. I looked out toward the horizon, clouds rolling like smoke over the hills. Let's see how deep this rot goes, she smiled. That's the spirit. And as thunder grumbled in the distance, I realized the storm I'd been waiting for was finally here. 2 days after the hearing, the sky over Coyote Ridge broke open with rain, the kind that makes the air smell like copper and memory. By then, the injunction was all over the news. The County Chronicle headline read, Judge freezes HOA operations amid fraud probe. Below it was a photo of Ellen leaving the courthouse, her face half hidden behind an umbrella, pearls dull in the gray light. Claire was already 3 steps ahead. She had filed for expedited discovery, and by the end of the week, we had a flood of data. Emails, invoices, internal memos, even voice messages pulled from HOA servers. She called me one evening, excitement buzzing in her tone. Jake, you're not going to believe this. We just found a chain of emails between Ellen and her cousin Susan. They literally spell out the plan. I could hear papers rustling through the phone as she read aloud. Once we shift the south boundary line, Walker's acreage will fall under jurisdiction. Once he builds, we hit him with non-compliance and back dues. That'll either make him pay or sell. My grip tightened on the receiver. So, it was personal. It's worse than personal, Claire said. They did it to others too. 4 families. 2 already sold under pressure. I went quiet. The rain drummed against the window like soft applause for evil. Jake? Claire's voice softened. We'll nail them for it. That night, I printed every one of those emails and pinned them on the wall of the barn, one by one. Each line of text felt like another nail in their coffin. The next morning, Hank Cooper showed up with his camera and recorder. Mind if I run an update? Make it loud, I said. By sunset, the story went statewide. Hostile HOA scheme uncovered. President and clerk tied to forged land records. And that's when everything started collapsing. The first domino fell when Susan Harper, the cousin, was suspended from her county job. The second came a day later, when Ellen's own board members turned on her. Two resigned outright. One called Claire privately to cooperate in exchange for immunity. The man confessed that Ellen had been funneling adjacent dues into a personal slush fund, paying off contractors, financing legal intimidation, even remodeling her lake house in Evergreen. Claire filed an emergency motion to unseal the HOA's financials. When the judge approved it, what we found read like a criminal's ledger: wire transfers labeled consultant retainer to an LLC in Nevada, a $38,000 community engagement expense for a private PR firm, and nearly $100,000 spent under litigation containment. Claire grinned when she saw it. That's money laundering in khakis. The DA's office took notice fast. By Friday morning, unmarked SUVs were parked in front of the HOA office. Agents carried out boxes of files while reporters shouted questions through the rain. Hank called me that afternoon, breathless. They just took Ellen out in handcuffs. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked out across my field, wet, green, alive. What about Tyler? I asked finally. They're looking for him. The footage of him cutting your generator line made the evidence list. He's not going far. That night, I sat on the porch with a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of coffee gone cold. The lights from the county road glowed faint through the fog. For the first time in weeks, there was no hum of drones, no engines, no trespassers, just the sound of rain on tin. Claire called again later, her voice softer this time. "You did it, Jake. It's over." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "No, it's starting to be over. There are others out there, other folks they pushed around. We'll find them," she said, "and when we're done, Coyote Ridge won't exist on a map anymore." Over the next week, the dominoes kept falling. The county dissolved the HOA charter pending investigation. Their accounts were frozen. The properties they'd annexed were formally restored to their rightful owners. When the sheriff posted the official notice on their office door, someone, nobody knows who, taped a handwritten sign beside it. "Welcome to Freedom Ridge." The story spread faster than gossip in a church parking lot. People from neighboring communities came forward, thanking Claire, thanking me, sending pies, homemade jam, even offers to help rebuild my broken gate. One evening, as the sunset bled orange over the wet fields, Hank stopped by again. "Feels good?" he asked. "Better than good," I said. "Feels earned." He smiled, turned off his recorder, and looked out at the barn. "So, what now?" I thought for a long moment, then said, "Now I get back to what I came here for. Dirt, peace, and honest work." A gust of wind rolled over the grass, and somewhere out by the pond, the frogs started up their chorus again. For the first time, the sound didn't feel like background noise. It felt like life starting over. The news cameras didn't come that morning, and I was grateful. Some endings don't need an audience. It had been 3 months since the injunction, and Coyote Ridge was finished, dissolved, audited, and stripped of every illusion of power. The county returned ownership rights to all affected landowners. The state seized Ellen's accounts. Her cousin, Susan Harper, faced charges for falsifying records. And her son Tyler, the one who cut my power that night, pled guilty to vandalism in exchange for community service and probation. Justice wasn't fast, but it was thorough. My land was quiet again. The air smelled like hay and pine. The pond brimmed full after weeks of rain, and the bees from my hives floated lazily through the clover. The barn, once leaning and weathered, stood red and proud with its new cedar siding. Still, something in me stayed restless, the kind of ache that lingers after you've fought too long for peace. That morning, I drove into town for lumber. On the way back, as I rounded the last bend before the property line, I saw her, Ellen Vance, walking along the county road, flanked by 2 men in suits. One carried a briefcase, the other an umbrella, though there wasn't a cloud in the sky. She wore dark sunglasses and a long gray coat, her once perfect hair streaked with silver. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The hum of cicadas filled the silence. I pulled the truck to the shoulder, killed the engine, and stepped out. "Didn't expect to see you out here," I said. She stopped, chin lifting slightly. "Mr. Walker." No venom in her tone this time. Just exhaustion. "You here to measure my ditch again?" A faint smile ghosted across her lips. "No, just walking. My attorneys wanted to discuss settlement terms in town." "Looks like they discussed more than that," I said, nodding toward the courthouse down the road. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't deny it. "They're offering me a plea deal," she said. 2 years suspended sentence if I cooperate. Cooperate with who? Everyone I ever lied to, she said quietly, and that's a longer list than I want to admit. I didn't answer. The wind moved through the tall grass between us, soft but constant. After a moment, she looked up toward my property, the barn, the beehives, the flag fluttering over the porch. "It's beautiful," she said. "It was always beautiful," I said. "You just couldn't see it past your fences." For a second, I thought I saw something break behind her sunglasses. Not regret exactly, something older, heavier. She nodded once. "Goodbye, Mr. Walker." "Goodbye, Mrs. Vance." As she walked away, I noticed her shoes sinking slightly into the soft shoulder of the road, leaving faint tracks in the dirt. I watched until she disappeared around the bend. When I got back to the house, the afternoon light spilled golden across the fields. I poured a cup of coffee and sat on the porch steps, letting the silence wrap around me. There was no drone hum, no engines, no distant voices claiming what wasn't theirs. Just the low hum of bees and the rustle of wind through the trees. Claire called later, her voice softer than usual. The DA accepted the plea. 2 years probation for Ellen. Tyler's cooperating too. He gave them everything. Bank records, invoices, even the notes Ellen kept in her planner. I nodded, though she couldn't see me. "Good. Maybe they'll all learn something." "Maybe," Claire said. "You sure you're done with this fight?" "I was done the moment the fences held," she laughed lightly. "Then take a breath, Jake. You've earned it." After we hung up, I walked down to the pond. The surface mirrored the sky, pale blue and wide open. Near the edge, a few of the university's monitoring poles still stood from when the site was under research status. I decided to leave them there, not as shields, but as reminders. I knelt and touched the damp earth. For the first time since buying this place, I didn't feel like I was guarding it. I felt like I was part of it. That evening, neighbors stopped by, a retired teacher, a young couple who'd just bought the next farm over. They brought a pie, shook my hand, and told me they were thinking about applying for their own conservation designations. "Funny thing," the teacher said, "you scared the HOA crowd, but you inspired the rest of us." I smiled. That wasn't the plan. Sometimes good fights have better side effects. When they left, the last light of day caught the new sign I'd carved and hung by the front gate, the same spot where their first fake notice had once fluttered in the rain. The sign read, "Private land begins here, and your fantasies end." The wood grain gleamed like bronze in the fading sun. Later, as twilight deepened, I walked the boundary one last time. The fields were quiet, the air cool and steady. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a lone coyote called, long and low, a sound not of warning, but of belonging. I stopped by the old fence post, the one Ingrid had remarked months ago, and set my hand on the top rail. This was the line they'd tried to erase, the line I'd rebuilt, the line that held. As I stood there, the lights of distant houses blinked across the hills. Not enemies anymore, just neighbors. Maybe that was the lesson buried in all this. People can fake authority, fake paperwork, even fake laws, but they can't fake ownership. Not the kind you earn with sweat, scars, and soil under your nails. The wind carried the scent of sage and wood smoke as I turned back toward the house. The barn light glowed soft and steady. The bees murmured in their hives like a heartbeat returning to normal. For the first time in a long time, I felt it. Not victory, not relief, just peace.